I believe that security is a never-ending battle, right? It's a never-ending arms race between the attackers and the defenders that has no real conclusion.
Hello, everybody. I'm Titus, the VP of Go-to-Market at Civic, where we're focused on enabling secure agentic AI with authentication, orchestration, and automation at the core through our products Nexus and Auth. On this show, we unpack what's happening in the AI space, from agent ecosystems, tooling, security that keeps them running. Before we begin, as always, don't forget to like and subscribe. Follow us on your favorite platform. Your support always makes a difference. Now, today, we're joined by Mitchell Amador from Immunefi. He's the founder of Immunefi, the leading on-chain security platform in Web3. We're here to explore the next frontier of cybersecurity: AI agents, automated threats, autonomous defense systems. We'll be exploring the AI security arms race, the growing risk of next-gen ransomware, and why defending digital infrastructure will take a new model for incentivizing defenders. So, Mitchell, thanks so much for joining us. Now, before we dive into Web3 security, I'd love to hear a little more about your journey, what first drew you into crypto, and how you find your way to founding Immunefi.
Sure. Okay, that's a bit of a spicy question, because I came in a long time ago, and I think what drew me to crypto was a combination of poverty and a chip on my shoulder. When I discovered the Bitcoin white paper in 2012, I thought to myself, like, wow, this is a completely different way for looking at finance. And the old system sucks. The old system, gives no advantage, gives no opportunity to people who don't already have serious and material advantages. And here's a system that starts from the ground up, where anybody can, get involved in over the internet. This is inspiring. What kind of social systems can we create with this? What kind of monetary tools can we create with this? How can we change the world with this? And that's really what drew me into the industry in the first place, which has since then become my career and my vocation. Immunefi started much later. We started Immunefi almost 10 years later in late 2020. And that was after many years working in the industry and seeing all the different ways where destruction happens and all the different ways of getting pwned. I dealt with, $5 wrench attacks. I've dealt with people trying to actively hack and access seed phrase in cloud storage environments. I've dealt with man-in-the-middle attacks of varying kinds, supply chain attacks, dependency attacks. I've seen firsthand guys, insider attacks go after hard drives with key IP and industrial espionage. And everything in between, stalking, let's say more suspicious stuff with intelligence operatives, hostage negotiations effectively over crypto. Lots of stuff I saw in those early years. It was quite a mess. And I came to the conclusion that if we did not have a scalable way to protect the industry, then there was no way that crypto was going to be a thing, and that everything we had put our hard work into was going to be delegitimized just because we couldn't protect it. We couldn't make a system that was safe enough to justify use. And that's why we made Immunefi, to be that solution to that. And that's indeed what happened.
And then we've seen you also talk about a new generation of digital threats, kind of beyond these kind of the bread and butter of attacks. What's happening now that's exciting or terrifying in the world?
That's an interesting combination of terms that are exciting and or terrifying. I suppose they're both equally true when you think about it. I think, when we think about crypto security, especially, but moving beyond that, and also in traditional Web 2, we were ultimately building on systems that were not originally designed to be super secure, or were not designed with that being the primary use case in mind. And given those constraints, both on the Web 2 and the Web 3 side, we've been very successful as an industry. But what we've seen over the last few years especially has been an explosion in attack surfaces, certainly on the on-chain side, but also on the Web 2 side with things like these new agentic attack services and all the different ways you can attack agents. And we've seen also with the development of LLM technologies, new attack vectors that were once economically unviable that have become really, really, really scalable and really, really cheap to do. And this has led to a mass proliferation of cyber attacks that have become, more and more severe in targeted specific ways. And that's been terrifying. That's been terrifying to the tune of billions of dollars, terrifying already in the short time that we've had. So I can touch a little bit more about those if you're curious about what the specific attack vectors are. There's a whole bunch of different ones. They're all terrifying in different ways. You've probably experienced a few of them yourself, seen them firsthand. But there's now a whole litany of new things that are driven basically by the LLM revolution and the maturity of crypto together.
So I think the ones that come to mind for me is like how low the bar is now to launch a high-scale, sophisticated phishing attack, for example, or social engineering attacks. Like those are kind of like immediately come to mind. But are there any other ones that are worth kind of calling out for the audience?
Sure. I think, okay, there's a few. Let's talk a little bit about the social engineering attack. Phishing attacks being cheap is one thing. I think the very scary thing we're seeing now is dirt cheap spear phishing attacks. And I'm sure you're familiar with the distinction between a phishing attack and a spear phishing attack. Spear phishing is just when you have a chance to customize the message with the information about the identity of the recipient. And so instead of some rando calling you and says, hey, Titus, I have an amazing new opportunity. Don't you want to come work for like Anthropic or something? And you'd be like, oh, wow, I don't believe that for a moment. Instead, it says, hey, Titus, it's me, your friend who went to school with you, right? Or who used to work with you 7 years ago from this firm. And I just thought the world of you. And now I work at Anthropic. I want to give you a special opportunity. And it's much harder to know, like a lot of those things are going to end up being true. And LLMs allow you to trawl vast amounts of data from across the internet and analyze that in order to construct attacks really efficiently. And you can do those types of sophisticated attacks at considerable scale. So whereas before, spear phishing was quite expensive to do, you needed specialized labor in order to search up information about the relevant people and construct the attack vectors and construct the message and do the scam. And social engineering was always like a craftsman's job. Now with LLMs, if you're clever, you can have a whole fleet of, spear phishing agents that are all targeting the same people who run treasury operations at every single fund in crypto, and you can do that at scale. And that's actually indeed what's happening. You might have experienced that yourself. I certainly get these types of attacks every single day.
Yeah, I did have a couple, both texting and Telegram and email, and like, I'm the CEO. I'm this like good Samaritan. Yeah, there's a ton of new ways to try to impersonate or like design those attacks. And yeah, you're right. The LMs have made this more accessible.
Right, and this is really quite terrifying because you can do a lot with it. So that's one attack vector. Another one that's really exploded has been, and this is something we especially see in crypto, but we also see it in traditional Web 2 stuff in general, is vulnerability detection at scale. LLMs happen to be not perfect. They need a lot of hands-on support, but they're getting better and better and better for driving vulnerability detection. And of course, in crypto, that's famously dangerous, right? One single vulnerability can lead to the theft of all funds in a contract, depending on how it's constructed. And that's terrifying. And now we have systems that can do that at mass scale and analyze every single major contract on a chain in a matter of minutes and see if there's any low-hanging fruit there to pick off. Like that's pretty scary stuff. And all these systems are improving day to day. But it's even worse on the Web 2 side because you can use these same methods to go and to attack traditional web infrastructure of various kinds where security is not important in the same way. Crypto is at least the most hardened public environment in the internet today, but the random person's website, not so much. And when you look at AI agents, of course, you see even less of this. Lots of those systems have been jailbroken in various ways, or lots of those systems have been compromised to disastrous effects, including the theft of money that those agents may have had access to. And so now vulnerability detection is going through this new age. It got easier and easier and easier to write code. Thankfully, amazing things like Claude Code and the like, but that code is not necessarily safe. And it's gotten a lot easier to detect and to find vulnerabilities at scale in a way that was not really feasible when the machines were not good enough for the job. So that's a second attack vector. And whereas humans have always been the weak links, this is giving attackers a tool to probe the entirety of someone's attack surface, both their on-chain infrastructure, but also their more traditional web infrastructure, or even their agents, if they dare put them on socials or elsewhere, or leave them accessible to the wider internet in some way, even accessing those as well. Now, anything that is accessible to the wider internet that wasn't developed with security in mind risks facing the full brunt of a sophisticated attacker that can access the best frontier models in the world and apply those to a security context. So that's pretty scary. That's pretty dark.
Yeah, I feel like everyone who's running unauthenticated endpoints should be concerned right now, to say the least. If they're still doing that, or if anyone has an exposed LLM endpoint that doesn't have any guardrails on it, also probably not a good idea to leave that on for a long time.
Believe me, people have not appreciably learned. The LLMs are advancing at a rate much faster than their builders. Most of their builders are, and security remains an afterthought, I think, or worse, more likely, something they're just not even aware of what the best practices in dealing with these questions are. Most of us have to learn the hard way in order to learn our lessons.
So hearing about all these threats, like, how would you say, how prepared is the industry right now for this? Like, what should they do?
Well, first I would ask which industry, right? Because there's a few. But if I were to think how prepared the on-chain economy is, I would say we are halfway to golden, which is way better than the rest of the world. Okay? So we're still screwed, make no mistake. We're still in a very difficult spot. We're in a pickle. It's very hard. But we have an advantage in that we have very, very small code blocks relative to most other industries. We have tighter programs. We have a history of investing in code security. We know how to do that. We've largely won the on-chain security code wars. There's still hacks, but much less than they used to be. We know what to do to stay safe there, and our big challenge is everything around it. If you think about the wider internet and how we protect these systems, and especially the new kind of agentic economy that's emerging, we are even less prepared, right? The standards for security there are still in flux. Most of the systems that were built there were never built to withstand the kind of attack pressure that is coming these days. And we're still building a lot of things as we go. So none of us are prepared, but I think those of us, at least on the crypto side, are farthest ahead, relatively speaking.
So what needs to change when it comes to like effectively fighting back against these well-armed actors?
That is a good question. A lot of things. I think if I had a Christmas list and I would say what needs to change first, I think the first one is attitude, right? Security is a must-have. I think we're going into a world where the internet economy is the biggest in the world. It's the most lucrative, and the internet financial markets, especially where crypto will sit ultimately and hold sway, are going to be the most lucrative part, or one of the most lucrative parts of that. And in the counterpoint to this incredible opportunity that's offered, the largest, I think, market and chance to create incredible wealth in the history of the world, is that it's also the most threatening and the most dangerous environment, where there's, a ton of psychopaths who are out there fishing around for a way to steal all of your money and all your hard work in one go. And so you have to bring that in. That's the first thing that I'll put on my list, that this attitude shift where you have to assume that someone's out to get you from day one, and you need to invest in your protection. You don't have to take a guess. You don't have to wonder. You have 100% certainty that someone's coming for you sometime soon as you have something of value worth taking. And so how do you choose to deal with that inevitability, right? You should be preparing for it, number one, right away. The second thing I would say is we need to change our priors about how we look at using the broader internet. And this is more of a spicy take. I think it's more unusual. But, for the last 20 years, the internet has been a mostly safe place, I think, at least the ClearNet. And you can do what you want, and most of the companies were good enough at building in protections and solutions that you could go off adventuring and it would be mostly fine. That has really begun to change with the rise of these LLM technologies, especially when they're applied on the social engineering side, right? The internet is no longer a safe place. Most random people messaging you is almost certainly a scam. It's almost certainly there to part you from all of your money and your wealth.
Instagram, WhatsApp,
Right.
Messenger, you name it,
Dynamic.
Telegram.
Right. And so we've kind of shifted this place where we were default open, default safe, and now the shift has become we're default dangerous. So we do this at Immunefi, for example. We, from the very beginning of the business, we're like, look, these, only work from a work machine, and we whitelist applications only, which means if it's not on the list, don't touch it. If it's not, the kind of thing that you should be using, don't use it, right? And we kind of constrain our use of the internet as craftsmen to be with less specific tools and less general. But the consequence of that is we've been able to dodge, every major attack, every major breach, resist or block every major threat. It really works, and I think that is a foretaste of where the whole industry needs to be going in order to protect these production systems, right? You have to assume that the kind of open permissionless environment is a little too dangerous to engage with, and so you're going to result in selecting for a circle of trust. And this dramatically simplifies your security systems, because now instead of having to protect your users, your team members, your colleagues from all the different possible threats, for which the chief vulnerability is them themselves as human beings, which are uneducatable and unfixable.
Oh, totally.
It's like, what are we going to do? I mean, we've all experienced it. We can't keep up. And instead of dealing with that, you're going to narrow down the problem space, the attack surface, so to speak, to a limited set of applications, to a limited set of dependencies, to a limited set of whitelisted gateways. And those are the areas where you need to guard and where you need to make your investments. And you can pick and choose, and that's going to be a much safer environment. I think that's thing number 2 that I would put on my wish list. Both of these things are big asks that, it'll be years, 5 or 10 years, I think, before the world adopts it. But these are the kinds of changes that need to be done.
Well, I remember when even like banking apps didn't have like simple things like multi-factor, and we're just okay with that. It's like, oh, there's just a username and password away from accessing my funds. And now that's not the case, thankfully, anymore for most cases. You have an SMS involved, but sometimes an authenticator app. I feel like we've had to reckon with that even beyond Web3, where, I mean, obviously the hacks were directly attacking specific like money pots, because you'd get the tokens, you get the value from the hack itself. I think in a lot of ways that's also what happened in the Web2 space, where more and more accounts got hacked because they were protected by a single layer, and now people are just layering in 1, 2, 3. Also, there was I think a SIM swapping craze back in 2017, 2018. That also thankfully changed. Like a lot of the mobile providers now have multi-factor as well on top of that.
But believe me, it's not good enough. We still deal with SIM swapping attacks to this day. Thankfully, they're less common. But, I still know of a whole bunch of applications that are using, just straight phone numbers to go and communicate their multi-factor authentication. And that's the only choice you have. And, the mobile providers are kind of archaic in their application of their security procedures. So things have gotten a lot better, but, we're still not out of the woods yet. Those basic learnings that you described, I think they've been well learned in America, but they're not so well learned in most of the rest of the world.
Yeah, as it happens, adoption of these methods kind of goes in waves, and it cascades out from the biggest value at risk to less value.
Right. That is exactly why we have an unusual advantage in crypto, I would say, on the security side, because we've been dealing with that, right? We've lived in a world where, from the very infancy, the very first major kind of, ICO that happens in crypto at size, of course, is the DAO, and then it immediately follows is the DAO hack.
Yeah.
Right.
Value at risk.
Right. And so we were birthed into that world, and so we've had a front row seat. Even we've been slow at really learning all the lessons, but we're still, much further ahead than, say, your average bank, I would say, of thinking about this and how to engage with it.
I mean, hearing more and more in the industry, like AI-powered threat detection. I think there's many different ways of looking at it. Observability is one of them, and so on. But how are criminals adapting to counter this type of wave of automation in cybersecurity? Because I feel like they're also working hard to build new ways of attacking and circumventing these threats detectors.
Well, I think counter is too strong a word, because what both parties end up doing, vulnerability detection is a good example. We have some incredible, AI vulnerability detection technology at Immunefi that we use to find, threats that could cause hacks and remediate them right away. And the reality is, like, us developing that is not entirely a counter per se to the attackers. The attackers are also developing said technology in the way that they can, and they're not a counter to us. We are in an arms race, but then we're both deploying similar types of technology in order to find, the vulnerabilities first, and then we'll see who gets what. Of course, we trying to protect the projects and keep them safe, and the attackers trying to exploit them and steal all the money that might be locked inside those contracts. So there is an arms race going on, but it's, especially to leverage these new novel applications and push them to their very limits and apply them, right? That you can think of these systems as being, incredible black boxes that can look even into contracts that are years old or code bases that are very old and see if they can find interesting things that could be exploitable. So that's one side of it. Another side that we think of is really changing our posture towards how we're using these technologies. So, for example, we've mentioned a few times this social engineering angle, which is something, over the next 5 years, all of your colleagues in the industry who are active and avid internet users are going to be dealing with this type of spear phishing as a normal course of the day, which is scary. So how are we dealing with that, right? And the answer is we're beginning to see shifts. Some of us are shifting in behavior. Others are shifting the way that we use our tools or the tools that we use ourselves in such a way as to obviate these needs, right? By limiting the attack surfaces, as I mentioned, by kind of gating the possible points of interaction to a more and more narrow set of applications where you can also install safeguards. So a good example of that, of course, is traditional things like email. Gmail has an extremely sophisticated spam and phishing detection operation, which is one of the hardest problems to solve. Like email phishing, email spam is a brutal issue, but they've done a pretty good job. Now, over the next 5 years, I think what you're going to see is more and more communication applications of all kinds adopting similar types of technology, and critically, companies and players with things to protect will be corralling their interactions into these kind of thermopolies, so to speak, these information thermopolies, these gates that they can more easily control access through and monitor and put protective measures on. And this is going to be how we respond more and more to these threats, because there's no, in an open and permissionless internet, the only way to counter a kind of dirt cheap spear phishing at scale is going to be to restrain the avenues of attack, right? There's nothing else that we can do. What are we going to do? Like try and churn all the information about ourselves from the internet? I'm afraid it's already out there. We can't get it back anymore. We're stuck.
Although there are companies trying to clean up some of the information out there with various degrees of success, I would argue. But then on the other hand, you do want the information out there for whatever business purpose, like personal purpose, you're an influencer, maybe like all those things mandate that you are some sort exposed out there with your information.
Sure.
I think what's interesting is like back in the day, you would have like a squirrel mail or something like simple like that to run your organization around. But now almost all serious companies will have some sort of a locked down like Google Workspace or a Microsoft 365 with like a super strong IAM posture where you have minimal access to things on a need to know basis. And it sometimes becomes harder to do like cross-functional business, but then on the other hand, it does protect you from these attacks and the access they'll get with the weakest link.
Yes. Yes. And I think the whole world's going to go in that direction because there's no other solution fundamentally. One thing we can be sure is that the human beings themselves are not going to be able to keep up with the threats. So we can't bet on them.
So that's definitely one obstacle that we're seeing in terms of like protecting ourselves. Are there any other obvious ones that you want to point out?
That's one obstacle.
Yeah, the fact that it's moving very fast, like it's preventing us from like creating a security posture quickly.
I think the other thing that probably comes to mind, and there's going to be like a corresponding kind of consumer or wave of behavior that deals with this is the proliferation of attack vectors and the proliferation of complexity in attacks is ultimately going to drive normal people to, I think, in my view, become Luddites in a way, become deliberate Luddites where they de-technologize themselves. I think you're starting to see this with the millennial generation and the way that they approach the use of electronics with their kids. But I think if you look 5 to 15 years ahead, that's also going to be how they use it themselves. And this is going to be another way of dealing with the risk and attack vectors that are coming from online sources. Like, you're just not going to use them. I know my own mother, she has no risk of these scams. She had a few experiences. She got a light phone and then she got rid of her phone entirely. And obviously she's very happy making those choices. But one reason, of course, driving that is she didn't like the complexity of the different ways that she could get targeted. And she wanted a permanent solution to that problem, and she ended up finding it. And I think you're going to see more and more of that. You're going to see another wave, and that is going to be driven ultimately by a slightly different set of attack vectors. Like, it's going to be the similar kind of spear phishing and social engineering concerns, but a lot of it's just also going to be the complexity and not wanting to deal with these problems and realizing there is a solution, just not having to deal with it and just refusing to access it, and that will solve that problem. Of course, coming at a different set of costs, and our generation will ultimately be remembered as, the technophiles. But that generation will only have had one or two before it passed on to the next, which is not so technophilia.
It's I think a bit of a grim way to look at it, where people are just like moving back to like analog or like non-tech. What can we do? What can good actors do in this space? What do you see the role of white hat hackers, for example, playing in this AI-driven landscape? There has to be a way to fight back, make people feel safe.
Sure. Well, there's lots we can do in this war because, you understand, I believe, that security is a never-ending battle, right? It's a never-ending arms race between the attackers and the defenders that has no real conclusion, only relative advantages and differentials of strength and weakness. Now, for what we can do, there is so much, because LLMs supercharge our ability to do good, right? Our ability to take action here. And the maturity of crypto itself has also given us more and more advantages as the defenders. This may have been a particularly rocky year for hacks, but it's not because it was driven primarily by blockchain-based hacks. Not at all. This was a particularly good year in that regard. And so what we can do ultimately is empower our security experts and our security leaders and our colleagues who are invested in this area, give them all the tools that they could possibly need to go and test the limits of our organization. Now, one person, one white hat, really can cover the entirety of a code base, right? They can review so much, they can see so much. And we have tens of thousands of these guys around the world who are eager and ready and willing to protect the industry, to do your security work for you, if only you would let them, okay? And now they're all supercharged by these new LLM applications and technologies. The consequence of that has been, for example, looking at the crypto side specifically, this increasing hardening of the industry. This is why, DeFi hacks are at a record low for this year relative to all the previous years. It's just been improvement in this area. And a lot of that has been driven by, say, white hat hackers especially, and their proliferation around the world, and them being given more and more ways to engage with security. And by that, just so we're clear, just so the audience understands, if I'm a security researcher, if I'm a white hat hacker, if you will, that I know how these systems work inside and out. I understand, what are their main points of vulnerabilities, how to think about access control on them, how I can leverage a hook into a full-blown exploit that could lead to damage or theft in some type of way. But there are so many ways that I can use my expertise, right? I can go and attack hardened systems. I can go help in the architecture or in the development process as kind of an internal red team. I can go give my advice on some consulting basis. I can build tooling or technology that can create scalable solutions. There's so many things I could do if only people would let me get involved. And I think that's something that we're seeing more and more of, that we're with more and more white hats being supercharged by this technology, and that's really having a positive effect on the world.
So that covers the tools part. What about like incentive structures and the way white hat are paid? Is that fit for purpose? Do we need to rethink how these defenders are incentivized to keep pace with attackers?
That's a spicy question. You know, where maybe we need a white hat union of some type. But jokes aside, are you familiar with how traditional white hat hacking incentives work by any chance?
Well, I am, but let's give a overview for the audience because they might not be.
Sure. So in the traditional kind of white hat hacking world, the best way to get these guys to help protect the broader community is through something we call a bug bounty. Now, in the traditional bug bounty world, the projects that the companies are going to hold most of the leverage, and they are going to be able to effectively set the terms which they have their lawyers write that are enforced in these commercial transactions. And the reward for the white hat hackers is basically discretionary and typically in the 5-figure territory, and rarely, very rarely in the 6-figure or even the 7-figure territory. And we do have a better model for that, oddly enough, which is in crypto. Similarly to how the security incentives of having to deal with attackers all the time have driven, right, crypto to accelerate the maturity of its security ecosystem and to bake security in earlier and give it more priority than it would in traditional tech. Or then you see in a lot of areas, for example, also in agentic technology, right, security was been an afterthought in the development of a lot of standards. Thankfully, it's coming more to focus now. But because security was made a first-class citizen in crypto, the result has been the superior incentive structure, where the value that a hacker can get is typically related to the potential damage that could be caused by an exploit and vulnerability. And so what I think we need to do in order to solve the incentive problem in a world dominated by AI agents, including on the security front, where a lot of these agents are, security agents, either defending or attackers, or whatever it may be. In that world, a key thing we need is to mass proliferate the incredible security incentives that exist in crypto, where white hat hackers can easily earn $1 million, $5 million, $10 million. I know a guy this year is going to make about $3 million from his bounties. I've known a whole bunch that have become multimillionaires on Immunefi. I've known a few that have made $10 million or more. It's like an extremely lucrative career. People are really getting paid well for doing what is good to the community. I think proliferating this model out into the wider internet in that considerable scale is going to result in some pretty incredible things happening. And that would really strengthen us in this world where agents are becoming more and more powerful allies, but also threats, giving the humans not just power, but also every incentive that they could possibly need in order to do what is good for society. That would make a difference.
Yeah, and I feel like almost crypto has this upper hand where it's clear what's the value at risk. Whereas I think with a lot of companies, like, well, what do I use to like decide what value is at risk? Is it my company valuation? Is it the amount of money I have in the bank? Is it something else altogether? Is it data that I'm holding for my customers? I think those are things to consider.
Right, 100%. But to that point, it's not as if we don't know what the cost of a data breach is, even on the traditional Web2 side, Titus, right? Like we know how, if, given a company with a market capitalization of $1 billion, we know what to expect, which is, probably 5 to 10% of market cap, at least temporarily, in terms of damages to the market cap of that business. We know what to expect in terms of operational costs, in terms of lost headcount, lost time. We have an idea about what the dollar sign value is, and we can plug that in and out based on our labor costs or based on how we're performing in the public markets. So we could justify it on other grounds, but the industry at this point in Web 2 very specifically doesn't, because those calculations would inevitably make the amount of money that gets paid to the broader security community considerably more. And the cost benefit analysis is it's better that things be kind of hazy and bad, but the economic balance heavily favor the companies versus them working at greater scale, but the cost per goods sold, so to speak, the cost of security interaction, the cost per unit of white hat support being more expensive. And that's been a de facto deliberate decision, I think, made by the Web 2 security community. So there is some nuance there.
So I think beyond this kind of obvious pay versus incentive versus like how to best protect the companies, what do you think are other glaring things that security teams are ignoring for now?
That's a good question. I think one good one is two sides. Number one, they ignore education. And then number two, they ignore that education is a dead end. And both of those things are simultaneously true, right? So there are specific areas where it makes sense to train team members or users on security practices with new kind of default behaviors that are extremely simple, and nobody does that. And then on the flip side, human beings are the primary point of vulnerability in almost every system, in my view. And they're kind of unfixable by their very nature. And so what you need to do is you need to develop systems that assume human vulnerability and are nonetheless quite difficult to break, right? Effectively, they require webs of trust in order to engage with privileged actions across the board, whether that be accessing information or making changes to the system. And nobody does that either. I mean, maybe people do even less of that than try and teach their team members and their colleagues. So those are the two obvious things. I think they require like a paradigm shift in how we think as security operators and how we think about making people safe into the future that need to change. We're a long way out from that, though. I think the default still right now is people, like, you don't invest in education at all. People are going to know what to do, which they don't. And people can keep up with everything that's changing in their own personal capacity, and they can't. And then at the same time, when you do education, you have all these expectations and requirements on people that they're incapable of really understanding because it depends on their will. And we're going to have to grow out of that. That's a big blind spot that everybody has. And for as long as we're in the mindset where we're chasing up that tree, so to speak, and we're just trying over and over and over again, we're going to keep hitting into the same walls over and over again that make us vulnerable, especially to social engineering attacks.
That makes a lot of sense. So as we spent a lot of time in zoomed out industry level, let's talk about Immunefi for a second. Like, what's your guys' long-term vision, given this like new landscape, given all these threats that we talked about, this kind of lack of education that's happening in the space? What does the world look like for you?
Sure. Well, I have a dream, Titus. My dream is that crypto specifically, but eventually the whole world and all the internet that it engages with is effectively hack-proof, as safe as it could possibly be. And what we're building at Immunefi is what we call the security OS, for the on-chain economy. But what it really is a way of unifying and aggregating all the specific solutions that we need into one AI-driven, AI-automated system. Because we are at the point now where we have a lot of the solutions to these problems, especially on the on-chain side, but also on the Web 2 side, I believe, where we have solutions to these problems. And the major challenge is, number one, do people know that they should be adopting these things? Do they know that they should be putting them into motion? And number two, do they know that how to operate them, right? And there are implementations now, like the best practices for a lot of this tooling is already out there. We can trust the machines to follow, if this, then that instructions, if A, then do B, in order to get amazing results. And if we were to just deploy that at scale across the industry, my view is we would see hacks, especially in crypto, come down by at least another order of magnitude, if not more. And that would already be a completely different world that we would be living in. I think the same applies for traditional Web 2, by the way. But that's a further thing. As we didn't see anybody understanding this, partially just because of our unusual position in the space is we have a real bird's eye view. We get to see a lot of the problems that people are experiencing with their infrastructure, both in crypto and beyond crypto, before anybody else does, I usually get pulled into these war rooms. I have to deal with these firsthand, run the operations, understand what's going on, understand how to deal with it, solve the problem, and so on. And as a result of that, we've got this unique view that it is possible to solve all these things today, that we do have everything we need if only we would all put the material into action. So we're like, screw it. We can't rely on the human beings to do it. Just to follow my own advice that I gave in the previous, question. We can't trust the humans to do it well. We will give everything a team, a company, an organization may need. We will give it to them on a platter, and we'll give them all the implementations, all the automations, all the orchestrations and operations that they may need in order to execute those security measures instantaneously, automatically, and without any human being. So that's what we're doing today, and we think this is ultimately going to be the global shield for crypto as a whole, and eventually much more and beyond.
Awesome. And finally, where can people learn more about you guys? We're going to stay connected or stay up to date.
Sure. If you want to follow what we're doing, please go to immunefi.com. There's a lot of stuff going on there. And if you want to follow us as well, you can follow us at immunefi.twitter or me at Mitchell Amador on X. We're always posting about this. We try and build in public. We're trying to talk about and spread the word about all these different challenges and how to solve them. Ultimately, they all have solutions. We really can create a wonderfully safe internet that is also a free place that doesn't require top-down controls everywhere if we're a little bit thoughtful about how we architect our experiences and our infrastructure. And that's something everybody can be a part of by their choices. So I really encourage you to follow us and check it out and see how you can get involved.
Awesome. Well, Mitchell, thanks a lot for joining us. I'm glad we were able to dive into these new attack vectors. These threats are essentially both Web2 and Web3 need to pay very close attention to. I hope it gave everyone following us something to chew on, whether they're building in the Web3 space, deploying agents, or just thinking where digital security is going next for their organization or for them personally. And as always, if you're listening in or if you're following us on YouTube, don't forget to like, subscribe, click that follow button on your favorite platform. It helps us bring you more great content. And don't forget to check out civic.com and learn more about what we do. And see you next time. Over and out.